Posted in my Discord group a very interesting theory.
See, that's where you messed up. You thought it was interesting.
He believed that the Lost Woods and Great Plateau may have swapped locations prior to the events taking place in Breath of the Wild.
But what? Why? I don't even
First of all, by examining the map, you can see that both are very similar in size.
What does that have to do with it? Hyrule Ridge and Central Hyrule are essentially the same size. Did they swap places as well?
I mean, the Great Plateau specifically always seemed like it was just not supposed to be where it was found.
Well, aside from essentially being a chunk of Earth that was returned to the surface from the sky, the passage of 10,000 years can really change an environment.
If we moved the Great Plateau to the location of the Lost Woods, then Mount Hylia's location would make much more sense.
But what makes more sense about that? The fact that a piece of mountain is closer to another piece of mountain? Honestly, if you look at the climate on Mount Hylia, it closely resembles the climate of the Gerudo Highlands, more than it does Elden.
And speaking of Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild's map seems to be very similar to the former.
What? If you think those maps look similar, wait until you see the Link to the Past map when it's tilted slightly. It actually lines up graciously with Breath of the Wild without having to explain it away with mumbo-jumbo region swaps. See, this is what the map would look like in Breath of the Wild. See, just a quick oriental change and voila, everything's exactly where it needs to be.
While the Lost Woods isn't directly south to the castle, it still is the second lowest area. But of course, the one thing that doesn't make sense is Lake Hylia. But don't worry, more on that later.
I know you say there's more on that later, but Lake Hylia does make sense. The theory doesn't.
Also, he believes that somehow due to Sheikah technology, they were able to swap places.
Somehow, you say? Just somehow. Great investigative journalism there, pal. Yeah.
With that out of the way, it is now time to compare the Great Plateau to the Lost Woods in order to hopefully get some sort of connection. Starting off, like the Archnoble stated, both regions are very similar in shape and size. Both areas also at one time would have held the Master Sword.
Yeah, they both would have held the sword because it was moved from the temple to the forest. Only reason one wouldn't agree is if you don't believe the game takes place in the Downfall timeline. Which it does, but it seems people still don't want to believe that aspect. I really don't get it.
Also, if we look at Mekar Island, which is just outside of the forest, it has a location that is somewhat similar to that of the Lone Islands leading to the Gerudo region.
I see where you're getting at with the flat top stone pillar angle, but honestly, in my opinion, it looks more like the level 1 island from the original Legend of Zelda. But that's me.
If we go back to our conversation with the old man once we get all 4 spirit orbs, he tells us to meet him where the imaginary shrine lines intersect. Of course, he is referring to the Temple of Time, but I always thought it was strange. Why not just say the Temple of Time?
Well, aside from the game using this time to acclimate the player with controls, puzzle solving, and using the map, it's also the old man trying to jumpstart Link's adventurer instincts by giving him a simple task. Come on, man. No hand-holding.
And then I thought of doing something. While the placement of the shrines isn't the exact same as the Great Plateaus, I made 2 lines in order to find out where the intersection point would be. And it was the Korok Forest. In other words, the location of the Master Sword. And if we go back to the Great Plateau, as you see, the intersection point is indeed the Temple of Time. In other words, the original Master Sword location. Still not convinced?
No, actually I'm not. And judging by the look on Link's face, neither is he. But I'm pretty sure me and him are thinking the same thing. Who's your dealer, bro?
Well, I looked at the Great Plateau and found a forest within it, and it is referred to as the Forest of Spirits. And as we know from Zelda lore, Koroks are the transformed forms of Kokiri that are referred to as spirits. Forest spirits, you could say?
You know, this might be the one idea where you're not grasping at straws. But unfortunately for you, I have a video to make, so listen. If we take a look at the map of the Great Plateau, we can clearly see that it's indeed Skyloft. So with that established, we can more than likely deduce that the areas in the plateau are likely to have been named after key people or events from Legends of Sky. With that said, it's more than likely that the forest was named after the spirit of the goddess, the spirit of the hero, or even the spirit of the sword, with the latter being the most likely since the temple and the plateau were both established as the sword's resting place. I mean, I just thought this kind of stuff in the lore was easy to understand. I just get so frustrated. Sorry.
But the thing is, not only do I believe this, but it also makes a lot of sense. First of all, if we swap the two locations in Breath of the Wild, then the Great Plateau's Castletown would be exactly where it needed to be in order to make sense.
This is the real reason I have problems with this theory. Because most of the questions that arise can easily be explained away naturally with practicality. Honestly, I don't get why anybody's going out of their way to explain this exact mapping of Hyrule.
And now to address Lake Hylia. I left off saying that the placement of this was the only problem with Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time's maps being the same. If Castletown is here, then how is Lake Hylia right beside the Great Plateau's Castletown? Well, the answer is as easy as swapping Castletown and the Lost Woods just like it was for Breath of the Wild.
It's only funny because you're saying it like swapping whole chunks of the earth happen every day. Like seriously, I don't get how hard it is for anyone to take into consideration that this takes place at least 10,000 years after Ocarina of Time. Meaning that most of the map's changes can be explained due to time, erosion, overgrowth, or even the game stating that Hyrule's landscape is due in part from the excavation during the search for the Divine Beast. The fact that you had to put a disclaimer stating that this is still iffy means that the evidence you provide is flimsy at best. Look, I can show you how Ocarina of Time fits on the Breath of the Wild map with only minor environmental changes. First, flipping the map so north is south and vice versa. The map regions all line up. Most of the regions have been renamed because Hyrule's You know what? I'm going to have a mini-series coming soon called Mapping Hyrule. And it's going to explain how all the maps from every game line up with Breath of the Wild. Stay tuned.
Now, since I've proven that these places were indeed swapped,
but you didn't prove anything. You made vague comparisons and ran with it.
it is now time to get into the how and why. Starting with the former, there are a few possible explanations for it. Since I played Twilight Princess, the first thing I thought of was Twilight magic. If you recall, there is a section of the game where a chunk of the Bridge of Eldin is warped to the Gerudo Desert. Now imagine this, but a little more powerful, and you got yourselves a region swap.
Look, I know that you later go on to say that this is highly unlikely, but you still get a sin for entertaining it, knowing damn well the Twilight Mirror has been broken and there's no communicating between Hyrule and the Twilight. Plus, downfall timeline and whatnot.
The second possibility would be Sheikah technology, which very well could be the case. I mean, they managed to build the Divine Beasts, shrines, as well as the 5 storage units for the Guardians resembling giant pillars that were kept very far underground. So the possibility of them being able to move something as big as the Great Plateau could happen.
True. The Sheikah are advanced enough to build such machinery, but wouldn't that tech have been found along with the Guardians and the Divine Beast during the Great Excavation? I think so.
But I think the answer is much simpler than that. You see, if we go back to Skyward Sword's story, we can find out that when Demise...
What? Excuse me?
But I think the answer is much simpler than that. You see, if we go back to Skyward Sword's story, we can find out that when Demise...
Come again?
You see, if we go back to Skyward Sword's story, we can find out that when Demise...
Nah, man. You can't be one of the coveted Zelda masters and historians if you're gonna mispronounce demise. Dude, it's a regular word in English. How'd you even get that wrong? 10 sins.
So finally, we are left with one question. Why do this? Well, from looking at the obvious reason, it must have been to hide a Master Sword. Instead of moving the Master Sword to the Lost Woods, they moved the entire Lost Woods to where the Master Sword is and placed Castletown in that now empty spot.
Or, hear me out, maybe when the sword was moved to the forest, it was done while the sword was outside of the stone pedestal. Because you see, the only time the sword was moved was right after Ocarina of Time. Once by Zelda when she returned Link to the past, and the other time by Raru when he moved it after the sages had to seal Ganon because he defeated Link and obtained all 3 of the Triforce pieces. You know, in the downfall timeline. Only time the sword was
Now, since the swap was most likely to hide the Master Sword, the question now is, why hide it?
What do you mean, why was the sword hidden? We've had many games and lore provided to us that explain that. The sword is the entrance to the sacred realm. They are hiding the sacred realm.
So, most likely the swap was done in order to protect people from any harm.
Nani? What? Like, it's to hide the sacred realm. And it still is the reason the sword is... You know what? 100 sins. Yeah.
I made some very solid connections between the two areas, explained how the swap would have made sense, as well as how and why they would do it.
But nothing you stated was solid at all. Like, at all. it was mainly hypotheticals at best, with you having to feign ignorance to the provided Zelda lore, just to make these vague connections seem like they work. You provided no concrete proof or evidence from anything that's hinted at in the game. If you ask me, this theory falls really flat.
As far as I'm concerned, after months of YouTubers theorizing this, the mystery of the Great Plateau has finally been solved.
Well, you should concern yourself a little more if you ask me. See, this is the main reason I dislike this theory so much. It's an unnecessary explanation to a very unnecessary question. The Great Plateau used to be Skyloft. Skyloft turned into Ocarina of Time Castle Town, which decayed over time and due to climate change and other environmental reasonings, now sits alone and desolate as a testament to a time long past. See? Easy. Simple.
Before you get the paraglider, there is a fog that prevents the player from leaving the plateau. Instead of Link dying, could this have just acted like the Lost Woods fog and teleport him back to the plateau? Is the fog from the Enchanted Woods and the Great Plateau similar? But then, why does it disappear once you get the paraglider? If the two locations were swapped, it might make sense that the remnants of the fog would linger since the Great Plateau was the original location of the Lost Woods.
Then why would it linger for so long? You know what? I'm just gonna give you a sin. Yeah.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video. Hit like and subscribe if you did. The support would be really appreciated. Also, I hope nobody's offended, because I'm a fan of Zeltic and everybody else who makes Zelda videos. You know, I have the love for the community as well. It just, you know, from one fan to another, sometimes you hear things you don't like, so you gotta point them out. No hard feelings. By the way, I also have a Mapping Hyrule series coming soon where I compare every Zelda map to the Breath of the Wild and show you how it fits perfectly. So stay tuned, hit like and subscribe. Bye.